Welcome to tonight's office hour webinar. We are going to be talking tonight about lots of beekeeping management and questions. So I'll have our team introduce ourselves real quick. My name's Anna Heck. I'm an apiculture extension educator. Megan, do you want to go next?
I'm Megan Milbrath, and I'm half research, half extension in the Department of Entomology.
Great. Zach?
I'm Zachary Huang. I'm associate professor in entomology. I've been here 25 years.
Dan?
Dan Wines. I'm the farm manager at the honeybee farm, Pollinator Center on South Campus.
And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Raudio. I'm a guest tonight to tell you about a gardening program that we have at Extension.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for joining. This is an MSU extension program, and we have a civil rights mandate, and our programs are open to everyone. All right, so I'm going to get us started with announcements. Then Sarah is going to talk about foundations of gardening, like she just said. Dan is going to talk about new colonies. So if you have new package or nucleus colonies, he'll talk about those. Megan's going to talk about swarms and splits. Zach will talk about moving bees. We'll all talk about Varroa and then answer questions. So to get us started with the announcements, we put all of the links for tonight's webinar on a single web page. So if you go to the web address that's linked here or use your QR code, you'll find our video page and it has all of the links from tonight's webinar. All right, we've mentioned this before, but we're still really excited. There's an awesome new tool that we developed with other universities. It's a diagnostic tools for honeybee medicine, and it goes through how to identify some common honeybee brood diseases, how to test for them. So it's a really, really handy tool, and it's interactive. So if you haven't checked that out, be sure you do so. It was developed with veterinarians in mind, but it will be, I think, a helpful resource for all of our beekeepers. And then we also wanted to share that we have an online course that's free called this Beekeeping Right for Me. You might be getting lots of questions right now from people who have never kept bees and who are thinking they might be interested, but really don't know what's involved. So you can send them to this online course. It's free and it will go through some of the demands and considerations for beekeeping before getting started. All right. We also have a website or webpage where we compile a lot of resources for people who are getting started with beekeeping in Michigan. So that's on our website. We posted our April webinar to our Michigan State University Beekeeping YouTube channel. We're recording tonight's webinar. We'll post the recording to the YouTube channel as well within the next couple of weeks. All right, and we also really want to encourage everyone to be part of a local beekeeping club. Our local beekeeping clubs provide a lot of local information and education and beekeeping community for people here. And we have about 30 beekeeping clubs in Michigan. So we hope that if you haven't already found a beekeeping club, that you go to Michigan Beekeepers Association's website, click Michigan Bee Clubs to find a local club. And if you do already belong to a club, that you find ways to get involved. We list our upcoming events on our website. So if you go to pollinators.msu.edu, you'll find the events tab, and we have a lot of upcoming events that are listed there now. So some highlights: we are continuing with our monthly beekeeping office hours webinars monthly. So you'll see the dates on the screen. If you're registered for tonight, then you're registered for the whole series of monthly webinars. We also just opened up registration for many in-person beekeeping workshops. So we have a queen rearing workshop listed, hygienic testing workshop that's for selecting certain genetic traits. If you're interested in producing more queens, we have a lot of just in-hive beekeeping workshops where we'll walk through hive handling, colony inspections, how to check for Varroa mites, seasonal beekeeping management. So lots of opportunities. Not only in the Lower Peninsula, we also have a couple of events planned for the Upper Peninsula as well. So we hope to see you there. And then if you want to get regular emails about our upcoming events and new articles, you can click on the Stay Connected button of our website and sign up for our newsletter digest for the Pollinators and Pollination News Digest. And Sarah might even share, there's lots of gardening news digests as well that you can sign up for. If you have questions about beekeeping in Michigan, you can send them through our Ask Extension form on our website. If you click questions, you'll find the form, and you can also attach photos if you want to ask about something that you're seeing in your hive. All right, Megan, do you want to talk a little bit about Northern Bee Network?
Yes, so the Northern Bee Network is a website that's maintained by us at Michigan State University. And it is just a listing of people who have bees or queens for sale or for trade. So if you've got nukes that are available for sale, you can just sign up to be listed, or if you're looking for nukes for sale. I actually started it because I used to sell nukes and I had so many people ask me if I was out where they could get them, and there wasn't a directory. So it's at northernbeenetwork.org or .com, and you can sign up for a free listing, or if you're looking for queens or nukes from Michigan, you can check it out.
We are going to next have Sarah Raudio talk about foundations of gardening. And this is part of a little series of guest presentations we're doing this year as part of our office hour webinars. So some of you might remember that last month, Chris Bardenhagen talked about Corporate Transparency Act, which is a law that would affect a lot of beekeepers who are running their bees as a business. Tonight, we'll hear about MSU Extension's Foundations of Gardening program. Next month, we're going to hear about SARE, which is Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. In June, we'll talk about managing farm stress. July, agribility, so that's about accessibility in agriculture. And then in August, the MSU Product Center, which can help with selling different kinds of products. So these are short presentations that will hopefully give you ideas about other parts of MSU or MSU Extension. All right, Sarah.
Well, thanks, Anna. And I work with Anna quite a bit. We overlap in many areas. I'm in the plant world. She's in the pollinator world, but we do interact a bit. So I am the MSU Extension Master Gardener State Leader. And a lot of people have heard of Master Gardener. Not everybody knows exactly what it is, but if you don't, I'll talk about it a little bit at the end. I'm also a consumer horticulture educator, which means that we develop programs for the homeowner or non-homeowner who's working on smaller pieces of property, and all with horticulture and plants. So next slide, Anna. So we have recently, over the last couple of years, revamped the way that we train our volunteers. We used to just train our Master Gardener volunteers pretty in-depth with horticulture and have them work out on volunteer projects. But we have kind of reinvented the way that we do this, and a lot of states in the United States have done this, where we're now opening it up to the public. And what that means is anybody, whether they want to move on and become a volunteer with us or not, can enroll in our Foundations of Gardening course. So I'm going to show you a couple little snippets of what this course is like, and then, of course, share some information with you on our next course coming up. So what this is a 10-week online certificate course. So when you get through the course, if you pass all of our assessments, you walk away with a really beautiful certificate. It is non-credit, it's not a credit course, but it gets pretty deep in the science of gardening. So it includes weekly webinars that are delivered by our team. I'll show you a quick picture of our team in a minute here. But here's all the topics. Go ahead, Anna, you're good. So we cover everything from the soil to the big picture. So what's really great is you'll learn about the soils and just general plant science, propagation. You'll get to learn about entomology, which of course some of you out there might know a little bit about, but really how it relates to plant diseases, pests, and problems we have. Lawns, flowers, trees and shrubs, fruits and vegetables, we cover the whole thing. And then at the end, kind of talk about the big picture of how we impact water resources and think about how we can garden more on an ecosystem level and things like that. So the course does cost $350, but it is pretty in-depth. It's 10 weeks, and participants spend about 5.5 hours doing all of their pre-work, and then we have a 2.5-hour webinar. We do have scholarships available. I'll share some information about that in a slide in a moment. There is a QR code on here that you can either scan right now or come back to later, and then I also printed out the website there if you wanted to type that in. So next slide. This is just giving you a little bit of feel of what the course looks like. It's kind of a course that's mostly delivered, it's entirely delivered online, but some of it you do on your own, and other times you're interacting, like you're interacting with this team online live. So This consists of 10 self-paced units, but they're all timed, so you kind of can keep up with it. And then we have these virtual class sessions. If for every unit, there's assessments, and then in the end, if you pass everything, you get a certificate. There's social opportunities to interact with folks, and we have tons of downloadable resources from all those units that I just showed you. So next slide. This is just a little bit of a snapshot of what our live sessions look like. So you do all this reading and activities and website explorations and things like that before you come to our live class every week. Sometimes you'll bring something to the live class, and the live class is all about interaction with us and our team. And we'll talk, we have several speakers that do the different units, but we'll talk about some of the more complex types of topics like photosynthesis, for example, get a little more in depth with that. We do live demos often. We do activities with all of you. The bottom right is an interactive activity that folks can do with us to try to identify what's causing the plant damage on this particular leaf, things like that. So it's a lot of fun when you come to those live sessions. Next slide. And here's our team that teaches it. We've had a little bit of a turnover. So there's a retired person in this picture and a couple new people that have come on board. But we have a team with all these different types of expertise. So we have a couple entomologists. We have people that have more of a background in ornamental horticulture and the ornamental shrubs and flowers. My background's actually in aquatic ecology. So I do some of the ecosystem impacts of gardening. So we have a group that covers all the different topics and presents the live webinars. Next slide. And then, like I said, for every unit up at the top, we've got these beautiful little icons that you'll earn during the course. And once you pass all of those units and finish our final exam, you walk away with a great certificate showing that you've had this pretty in-depth training. Next slide. So I'm just sharing a little bit of details of our next courses coming up. We just finished our winter course, so we offer this twice a year, once at the beginning of the year and once after Labor Day. So we just finished our spring course, and that one just closed up, but we will be having registration open for our fall course this summer. So that course will take place from September 10th through November 19th. On Tuesdays is our live webinar part of that course from 6 to 8:30. You can add your name to a contact list. So if you scan that QR code or go to our website, you can get to the website and enter your contact information, and we'll keep you in touch when the scholarships open and the registration opens. Next slide. So our scholarships are worth $150. So there's a scholarship application that will open up May 29th. If you're interested in taking the course, you can apply at that website. Same QR code I keep sharing is the same one on all these slides. So you can just go to the website, you'll receive the contact information if you're on our list, and you can apply for a $150 scholarship if that's something you're in need of. So next slide. For those who graduate out of the course, if you really love what you're doing and you want to become a master gardener, then we have a follow-up free course, free application where you apply to become a volunteer with MSU Extension and then work within our MSU Master Gardener program. And our mission is to do gardening in several areas, including teaching environmentally more sustainable gardening practices, to food gardening, to beautification of communities, and all types of fun stuff with kids. So it's a really great program. Next slide. If you want any information about either the Master Gardener program or Foundations of Gardening, we have a dedicated website, and it's right here for you. So I believe Anna's going to have this information available to those who want to get it later, and just email us here if you have any questions about the course or the Master Gardener program. Thank you, Anna, and everyone.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing about the Foundations of Gardening program. It's a great time to talk about gardening because I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about the landscape and what nectar and pollen their bees are bringing in. So thanks again. All right, next Dan's going to talk about new colonies. And by new colonies, we mean mostly colonies that you got as a nuke or as a package.
Yeah, so and just to briefly define for those of you, and we talked about this last month, but a nuke is a short for nucleus colony. It's a complete unit. It's got all the components of a big mature beehive. It's just in small scale, but it's got frames with brood and food and laying queen and everything. Typically when you buy a nuke, like 5-frame is fairly common, 4-frame sometimes. So it is complete, but it's small. And then a package is just typically it's a set weight of bees, which 3 pounds is very common. Sometimes you'll see smaller or larger, but you've got your 3 pounds of bees, which happens to be about 10,000-ish. You'll get a mated queen with that as well, and then they've typically got a can of syrup with them to sustain them during transport and until you install. So some of those you may have already received. I know packages started showing up in the last week or so. Nuke producers are flat out right now. So nukes probably have been available and will continue to be for the next few weeks to a month or so. So we have videos on the MSU University Beekeeping YouTube page, both on how to install a package and install a nuke. We get a lot of questions on these, so we made these videos. So if you're new to bees and you have them coming soon, we'd certainly encourage you to watch these videos and kind of think through the process before you get out there in the bee yard. It's good to kind of have your plan, understand what you're trying to do, make sure you've got all your materials and things. So I would point you towards watching these if you've got an upcoming install of a new hive. Once you have installed a hive, then we start talking about, how to make sure it's on track, how to make sure it went well. So then you'll be looking to do an inspection. And typically, I know as a new beekeeper, you're likely to be very eager. You went out and you installed your nuke or your package, you want to go check the next day and make sure everything went well. Really, the best thing you can do, I typically advise people wait about a week. When you've installed that, whether it's a nuke or a package, you've made that install, I kind of like to give them a week to settle in. It's kind of, fragile is not quite the right word, but it's a little delicate. And so you're transferring bees into new equipment. I like to give them a chance to settle in, let that queen get established and laying. Also, by giving it a week or more, when you go back to check, how it went, it's going to be much easier if it's been a week or so because she will have more brood to look at, more eggs. So when you do that first inspection a week or so out, you don't need to find your queen. You need to see eggs, and that's going to tell you if you see nicely laid eggs like we see in this picture here on the right of the slide. That's going to tell you your colony is queen right. So you don't need to go through every single frame and find your queen and put eyes on her. If you see nicely laid eggs, that tells you your colony is queen right. Another thing to look for is kind of more of a context clue, but just seeing bees coming in, this is before you would even open up the colony. If you see foragers coming into the colony with pollen on board, like we've got this one here with this lovely blue pollen, that's kind of rare. Most pollen is yellow or orange or something. But if you observe the entrance and you see foragers coming back with pollen on board, that's generally a pretty good indication your colony is queen right, your installation's been successful. So you can kind of learn a lot about watching the entrance too. So once we verify queen right on our inspection, the next thing we want to do is kind of get a sense of the health of the brood. And to do that, we want, if you just install the package and you come back in a week, 10 days, you're not going to see the capped brood quite yet on the right. But you should see a lot of really nice, healthy larvae in addition to those eggs. So this photo on the left, I really like this because almost every single cell is filled with a really nice larva. Should look pure white. They should be shiny, kind of wet looking, moist. And you see these are nice and plump. These are, 5th instar. They're probably going to be capped for the next 12 of 24 hours. But what we like that we're seeing here and why I include this photo is because it's all fairly uniform. They all look similar. There's no discoloration. There's no deformities. Nothing looks dry or yellow or anything like that. So we want to see that in the larva. They're really white, shiny, healthy, well-fed. And then as our colony matures and we start to see capped brood, or if you have a nuke, it's going to come with some capped brood. Your queen will keep producing that. The uniformity, this is a really ideal frame here. And what you're looking for in your capped brood, beekeepers talk about the pattern, and they're talking about how contiguous is the brood, or how solid is that sheet. And this is this is about as good as it gets, this frame on the right. You're always going to see a couple, holes here and there. We've got, I don't know, 2 or 3% of them are empty cells, and that's great. That's about as good as it gets. The main thing is, though, all that is nice, uniform in color. We're not seeing anything that's sunken, greasy, chewed. We see nice convex capping. So as your colony matures, you want to see, and you're doing your inspection, you want to see eggs, you want to see healthy larvae, and you want to see that nice capped brood. That's indication you're not under sort of disease or parasite pressure. The next thing you want to look at as you're doing this inspection is you're trying to get a sense of how much food this colony has. And because you've installed it recently, it's a new colony. Keep in mind, it probably doesn't have a lot of foragers yet. It doesn't have a big population overall, and a lot of those individuals are dedicated to kind of raising that next generation and building that population. But we don't have a lot of those older bees quite yet to forage in those first few weeks. So we want to keep a real close eye on its food status. In doing that, what we want to see is like this photo here, where we have our capped brood, and then we have this band of pollen around the top of it. It's 3 or 4 cells wide, this band where the bees have gone out and got the pollen. They're storing it away. We do typically see this adjacent to the brood nest. So this colony is great. It's got, an adequate amount of pollen for the brood it's rearing. And then we also want to see honey, or in this case, nectar, which comes out in the corners of that, the upper, top left and right, and just across the top of that frame. Bees put the nectar generally around the perimeter of the brood nest with that band of pollen in the middle. So if you're not seeing a lot of that and you want to provide feed to your bees, that's not a bad thing. Right now where I'm at, we've got really good dandelion flow going. So, bees are getting it themselves. But if you're not getting it, if your bees are not getting it from the environment, providing feed through syrup primarily is a good thing to do, especially with these small units. Again, they don't have a lot of foragers, and they have to make a lot of wax. They have to draw out comb to be able to expand that brood nest as that population grows. They've got the comb is the framework, and to make the comb, they have to be really well fed in order to produce the wax. So providing syrup, if there's not a good nectar flow on, can help them do that. The other thing is that you want to look at, so we talked about queen status, we talked about, healthy, kind of ruling out disease, parasites, pests, food stores, and then the last thing I always kind of look for in colony inspection is space. And so, typically when you've got this new unit, you're going to install it in one box, whether you keep in mediums or deeps or 8 frames or 10 frames, you're typically installing in one box. Sometimes you might start in 2, especially if you've got some drawn comb. But generally, you want to keep, especially in the spring, our colonies are growing, you want to keep out in front of them with giving them space so they don't feel crowded and you induce congestion, which might lead to swarming just because they get crowded in the space they have. So another rule of thumb, beekeepers, it varies a little in recommendation, but I kind of like to think somewhere when they're occupying about 70 to 80% of the space that they've got, that's when I add another box. So if you've got a 10 frame box and your bee, you install the 5 frame nuke and they've grown a couple frames, they're into 7, 8 frames. Go ahead and put another box on. Again, you don't want to wait until they're wall to wall through that whole box and getting crowded. Better to be a little early with adding more space than a little late, especially in the springtime where colony growth can be really rapid. This is the time when populations build. So keeping out in front of them with that space. And then, especially if you're a new beekeeper, if this is your first year, you probably don't have an inventory of drawn comb, of those wax combs from previous years. So when you're adding this space, you're going to be adding a lot of foundation. Again, that means the bees are going to have to draw out wax to create the space to raise bees and store food. So again, if you're adding space, particularly foundation, making sure that there is plenty of nectar coming in, or if there's not nectar coming in, providing that syrup. So they're getting that sugar from one place or another, either the environment or you provide it. So if you're not sure and you don't know, you're a new beekeeper, and maybe you don't know the nectar flows in your area, you're uncertain. Michigan, we always have volatile weather, even when there's flowers, it's going to get cold and maybe there's not foraging temperature. So if you're unsure, if you're not sure if there's a good nectar flow on, there's not a lot of downside in providing feed to them. The worst thing, they're not going to take it. If they're flying and they're getting nectar source, they're probably going to touch your syrup, but not much harm in that. And then this is a really nice resource here for managing new colonies from the University of Minnesota Bee Lab, just updated 3rd edition. So would point you towards that. There is all of these, as I say, we've got the videos on the YouTube channel, but there's instructions on how to install packages and nukes and guidelines for feeding, and just how to generally, in first year management, how to build out this colony from a little small beginning unit into a big mature colony and get it through that first year. And then also, this is a webinar from a couple years ago that's on the YouTube channel, a little more in depth, but it goes through the installing. So again, if you're new and you're looking for some digital content, there's some really good resources out there. These links are, again, in that QR code will link you to some of these channels and outlets where these resources exist.
Thanks, Dan. Now Megan's going to talk about swarms and splits.
All right, thank you. And I'm very happy and excited to do this since I've made a split. So I'm still wearing all of my beekeeping gear and covered in propolis from a full day out in the bee yard. So this again, there are resources. There's an article that we have on our website on the beekeeping resources called "Don't Be Surprised by Swarms." The 2 main points in there is it does explain the biology of what's happening when a colony prepares to swarm. It looks at how you can tell if a colony is about to swarm, and then a couple different ways that you can make splits. And then we also, again, have videos. So at the same time when we did these, your beginner colonies, I like to call them establishing colonies. So like your nukes and packages. And then for your ones that have overwintered, we have a video on how to prepare for swarm season. So basically it's that article plus a lot of other things. And that's on our YouTube channel. All right, so there's a billion different ways that you can actually prevent swarming. I do want to say that swarm management is probably one of the most important things that you can do as a beekeeper, because this is what keeps you from being a public nuisance. So if you let your colonies swarm, you lose all the money, you lose all the honey, you risk putting your bees into somebody's soffits or behind their siding, and you also, they're going to be unmanaged for mites, and you're going to just mite bomb yourself. So managing swarming, a lot of people are kind of flippant in how they talk about it, but it's actually a really big deal. So it is really important, but there's not a right way to do it. The how you choose to do it is not important. It's just the fact that you do it. So one way that you can do it is just switch locations. If you have a really strong hive and a really weak hive, I don't know if the animations made it into this talk, but you can, look at that PowerPoint animation. You can basically just switch spots, and a lot of the bees, the foragers will go into that. Sometimes that can be sufficient. In Michigan, a lot of times that won't be, but that's something that literally did this today, and that's something that you can do. Another very, very easy split. So I know a lot of beekeepers that I talk to say, oh, I'm not ready to do splits. It's, I'm not an advanced beekeeper. There's 2 splits we're going to introduce here that absolutely anybody can do. You don't have to find the queen. So one of them is called a walkaway or a dirty split. So you can Google those 2 things and they'll actually give you examples. But let's say you have your hive in 2 deeps, and this could be done with a horizontal hive, and this could also be done if you had like 3 mediums, basically. But what you're doing is you're taking each one of those boxes. I should have made the other one disappear. And you're just putting the top box on one stand and the bottom box on the other stand. And you're just making sure that both of them have brood. As long as they both have brood, then one of them will have the queen. The other one will have eggs, and they can make a new queen. Worst case scenario, that queen doesn't come back from her mating flight, and you can literally just recombine them and move on with life. So this is completely, we do this all the time. We've done it at MSU. I've done it in my own operation. Even though it's a very, very simple one, it's a completely valid way to do it. And it's so much better than just letting your bees go into the trees. And then, so some of the concern about that last one is that sometimes you've got maybe all the brood on top, or like all the cat brood on top and all the eggs on the bottom. So if you just split them one to the other, it's not going to be completely even. So what you can do is this one, which is not my idea, but I've termed it the easiest split ever. And so in this case, we've got all of our brood in the middle, or where the bees are, and then we've got extra frames on the outside. And what you do is you just go through and you just mark every other one with a dot or an X, or you just remember it. And then you set up your 2 hives that you're going to put them into, and all of the ones with the dots go in one, and all of the ones without dots go to the other one. And you just shove them in the middle and you put foundation. So this one's nice because it retains the kind of arrangement of the hives, and it makes them more even. So all of those people that are out there being like, oh, I can't do a split, it's an advanced technique. You absolutely can make X's and put frames with X's in one box and frames without X's on another box. I feel like everybody who's on this webinar, if you can sign up for Zoom, you can make this split, basically. Okay, and then sometimes, so those are the 2 easiest ones. And the thing that makes them so easy is you don't have to find the queen. Sometimes it is really difficult to find the queen. It's a little bit nicer to find the queen because then you can choose, you know, the sizes of what you want to do, or you can add a queen cell, or you can add a mated queen or a virgin. So sometimes it is a little bit nicer. So this is the way that I generally do it, is if I've got my 2 deeps, I remove all the boxes, and then I shake all the bees into the bottom box. So this black box is representing a completely hollow box that I'm just using as a funnel. So it's an open box with no frames. You shake all the bees from the other boxes into that bottom box. And then because you've shook all the bees down there, by definition, you would have shaken the queen down there. And when I say all, like, if there's a frame that has 3 bees on it and none of them are the queen, you don't have to get those 3 bees in the bottom box, right? The goal is just to not find the queen. And if you find the queen, like you lift a frame up to shake it and you find the queen, then you just put her in the bottom box. So when I do this technique, I would say maybe half the time I find the queen anyway, and then I just put her in there. So then you put a queen excluder on it, and then you restack the hive. And then what will happen is the bees will reorganize themselves at night, but you know the queen is down at the bottom. So then now you can take the hive apart and make your split, but the queen is down below. And that is much easier and faster than trying to look through every frame to find the queen. So I did not do this today when I was making splits. I just had luck with me, and we kept finding queens on like the first frame. It was fantastic. But this is something that you can do if you're not someone who can easily find the queen. Okay, and at night they'll So this is another very, very simple split. And I do say remove the queen into a nuke, but it doesn't have to be a nuke in that it's like a 5-frame nuke box. So let's say you had a big hive, you shook all the bees down to the bottom, the queen's in the bottom. You could literally just take that 10 frame off the bottom, move it off to the side, and let that big hive requeen itself. You've again prevented swarming. That hive can requeen itself. If it doesn't work, if that queen doesn't come back from a mating flight, you just do a newspaper combine and let them move on with life. It gives the old queen a chance. And so like she's basically now a spare backup queen in this context. All right, and so that's this is this one graphically, so we can go through it pretty quick, but we've got our hive with queen and brood. We add our honey supers. This is something that I do mid-April. So we talked about this last week, is last month, putting space at top. So that was what I did before. And then at this time of year, this is like what I'm doing today, is I've got a box with drawn comb. I'm going to give her 2 frames of brood usually, so she has a little bit of food down, or a little bit of company down there. And then I give her a couple honey frames. So that's what I'm going to leave her with. And then the queen is going to be down there. All right. So again, worst case scenario, you recombine her, but you have her on hand, and then your honey making colony has a new queen. Again, this is not like the right way to do it. This is a way to do it. That's usually pretty accessible for most people. All right, another way to just prevent swarming is to remove full frames of brood. If you've got these wall-to-wall frames of brood, and especially if you can see a couple of bees that are emerging, so any colony will take a full frame of brood, and if you take that frame of brood and give it a really light shake, all of the old bees will come off, and then you're just going to have nurse bees remaining, and any colony will accept nurse bees, and any colony will accept babies. And so as long as there's enough bees to kind of keep it warm, and you've just got young bees, you can bump up your weaker colonies. So let's say you've got one colony that came out of winter with like 6 frames of bees, and another one that came out with 15 frames of bees. I would take 2 of these capped frames, give it a light shake, so you're keeping about like some of the bees that are on there and putting that into another hive, and that will equal. So that's what I mean by equalization. Obviously, you can take frames out for, queen rearing or for nukes or things like that. Another option that Kirsten Trainer talked about when she came to Michigan was a brood tower, and basically removed all the capped brood from the hives that were going to swarm and just put them all in one big tower, and then had a big tower of nurse bees, and they treated that one for Varroa and then used that for all their queen rearing stuff. So again, there's a million ways to do it. So in this hive, so this is some splits that I did one year where you can see the 3 hives in the back, and I just took a nuke from the top. And what I did is I shook all the bees down, moved all the brood above it, and then on a rainy day came back and took this split off of the top. And if this sounds fast, I usually get like 2 hours to give a talk on splits. So that's why it's nice to go back and read other things as well. But again, it doesn't really matter. So like I moved hives from the original location, but you don't have to move them from the original location. You could leave them in that same location. You just have to make them heavier because some of the bees will go back to the original hive. I used queen cells in these, but if your split is big enough, it can raise a queen. These were just nukes, so you could also just add a mated queen. There's no right option. It just depends on, what genetics you want or things like that. And then I moved these when it was cold out so they weren't flying, but you could also take a split during a nice day. You just have to keep in mind that, all of the foragers are going to go back to that original location in the original hive. So it's not that there's a right way to do it, but you just have to keep in mind that all the bees that know how to fly are going to go back to that original spot. All right. And then another thing is after you make splits is when your bees are going to supersede if you don't replace your queens in the fall. So if you've got really old queens, you should expect a supersedure. So don't be surprised when they requeen themselves. And after they swarm is when you can really start getting them to draw wax. Okay. And the main points, your colonies are going to swarm. That is their job. So we want to manage it. You can tell when it's getting close by watching the brood nest. And the 2 things that I watch for is backfilling in the brood nest, or when you have full frames of brood, like wall-to-wall brood. You can sometimes slow it down by giving it room outside the brood nest for nectar. So that's why I talk about, I put on supers 2 weeks ahead of time. And then you actually manage it by removing that capped brood. So that's either happening in a split or some sort of equalization. All right, and then hopefully you've done your Varroa management, so you've got lots of splits. If you're one of those reasonable beekeepers that doesn't just want to keep growing their operation, there are lots of places. So you can talk to your local bee club, you can sell them on the Northern Bee Network, you could partner with a student who doesn't have any money or someone in 4-H. You could sell them and donate the money. to MSU, or if you're really, really, really uncomfortable about doing splits, but you have big colonies, this is a great time to partner with your local bee club and just say, I know that my hives need to be split. I don't have the time or I don't have the knowledge to do it. Will someone come take my splits? And I've done that before. I mean, I don't have time to do it now, but like I've done that before, and that's a pretty fair deal for a lot of people. The biggest thing is just making sure that you're being a good citizen and managing your swarms.
Thanks, Megan. So now Zach is going to talk about moving bees. So if we're making splits and moving them to a new bee yard, we'll talk about how to do that.
So it often happens you have to move your bees, either as Megan mentioned, some people when they're making splits, they move the newly made splits away, about 2 miles away. Some people don't move them away and make it in the same yard. But other times you're moving your bees for pollination or for other reasons. So in the US, our bees are 80% of our bees are moved to California for almond pollination. In Michigan, bees are also moved for pollinating cherries and pears, so cucumbers, all kinds of crops. Michigan is a big state for pollination also. So what's involved in moving the bees? 3 basic elements. One is a timing. You want to make sure all the forages are returned home when you do the moving. So either move the bees in the evening, like probably right now, during the hot summer, even though it's still too bright, you have to wait until it's almost dark. But today it's kind of cool, so right now it'll be okay. So either a cold day or a rainy day or in the evenings. So the forages are back, so you don't lose all the bees. Because if you move during the middle of the day in the summer, in a strong current, you're going to lose 30-40% of the bees. That's how many bees are foraging at any point of time. So timing, and then you have to screen them so that the bees do not come out. Bees usually don't like being handled, especially on a truck ride. So you have to put a screen like this and staple it in front of the entrance. Make sure the screens are of the size at least mesh 8, so the bees cannot get out. If you use 6 mesh, that means 6 holes per inch. A lot of bees will get stuck in their holes with their head. Some bees will actually squeeze through. So 8 mesh is pretty safe. Although occasionally you see bee heads stuck in there, but not very often. And then any other cracks, you have to seal them so no bees come out. Well, one time I was moving bees with a student. At night, we tried to do an experiment, and then those hives had the rotten bottom boards, and they fell through, and all the bees started crawling. And your bee suits in the dark, you can't turn on the flash because there was stuff flying. So that was a disaster. Bees going through our pants and crawling over you, and then sting everything you could find. So make sure your hive is good enough quality. The bottom boards are solid, and then there's no cracks, no big cracks, and then ventilation. So right now, if you're moving your bees, you probably do not need to worry about just screen the entrance is enough. The reason we screen when not using a solid piece of wood is to make sure bees do not overheat. So during the moving transportation, bees will be agitated and they could produce too much heat, killing the bees. So if it's in the hot summer, say in July, then you need to pay more attention. So not only you have to have the screen on the front, on the top, you have to make sure they have a screen there and it's ventilated. Sometimes I even put burlap with water, soaked with water in the front entrance, if it's a very hot day. If it's 80, 85-ish, you need to do that. Give them water. Bees could use water to cool the inside of the hive so they don't overheat. So timing, no leak, ventilation, that's basically, those are the three main elements in moving. And of course, you make sure the hives are secure on your truck. So usually we use tie downs like I was showing in the slides. So that's very easy to do. Just tie up and then wrench it tight. So then there's no little chance of the valve cover pop open and the hive bodies separating from each other and bees will come out and start flying around. So that's all. So mine's pretty short. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Zach. All right, so you've heard us already talking about Varroa tonight. We are thinking about Varroa. One of our goals is to manage Varroa throughout the beekeeping season. We know that the Varroa populations are growing in the colonies, so we're thinking about when and how we will manage Varroa. So a really helpful guide is Tools for Varroa Management by the Honeybee Health Coalition, and it will go through all of your different management options. But kind of some things that we're thinking about here at MSU for different situations. So one, if we were to have a package colony and we're installing that package, so again, a package is going to be a box with bees and a queen, but it comes without brood. After you install a package colony, you know that there's going to be a period where they don't yet have sealed brood. So the queen will begin laying eggs, those eggs will develop into larvae, but before those that brood is capped, you will have an opportunity where all of the mites that are on those bees will be exposed on the bees and not reproducing underneath the cappings if there's no sealed brood. So that's a situation where you could consider something like an oxalic acid dribble. It's called the solution method on the label. And so you would want to do that probably after the queen is accepted. So not immediately after hiving that package. You'd want to wait 3-4 days or longer, 5 days, that's fine. But then once you do that oxalic acid dribble before the sealed brood is present. And in general, oxalic acid is a good option for us when there's not sealed brood in the hives. Another consideration, if you have a nucleus colony or a nuke, you might consider something like a hop guard treatment. Hop guard can be used when you have honey supers on. It also can be used in smaller colonies. In personal experience using the hop guard product, there's these brown kind of cardboard strips that have the solution with hops beta acids on them. And this, in my personal experience, the brood that was touching the strip didn't look like it survived. So you might kind of want to be careful how you place the strips, and then also consider doing them when you have when the nuke can handle losing a little bit of brood. But that would be a nice option for a smaller colony that has sealed brood. And then for our larger colonies that have sealed brood, a good option is formic acid. So that's going to be Formic Pro or Mite-Away Quick Strips. Those are nice because you can use them when you have honey supers on, and they're good when the colonies have a lot of sealed brood in them. So those are kind of 3 different options that we're thinking about. All of these treatments have restrictions. That's why it's so important to read the label and to follow it. The pesticide label is the law that we need to follow, but they will have certain things for you to consider. For example, formic acid is an effective treatment, but it has a temperature window of using it between 50 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit on the day of application. So we want to make sure that we're reading the labels and taking them into account as we're making our mite management plan. But those are some kind of springtime options for you. All right. Again, here are the links to everything we shared in the webinar. If you go to the QR code or this web page, we'll post the recording of tonight's webinar to the web page, and then you'll find the links that we mentioned. And with that, we are going to go ahead and answer your questions. And it looks like some of you already put your questions into the Q&A box, so we'll get started here. If you have a question, you should just find the Q&A box in your Zoom controls and let us know what you want to ask.
All right. Oh, good. Anna went black for a second. So, I guess I'll just start reading through them. The first question, which is put right at the beginning, it says, can you add a queen cell to a split not from the same colony? And I'll just answer this one because I was talking about splits, but yes, absolutely. That is usually what most people do, because a lot of times you're splitting all of your colonies, but you want queens from only your best hives. So that's very much a common practice. There is a question about, I think this was probably when Sarah was talking, and it says, do you work on developing local phenology charts that beekeepers and other pollinator enthusiasts can use as a resource for planting for pollinators? So I mean, Zach, keep kind of track of the key ones for mine yard. Like I'll just and all I do is just take a photo of whenever something important, the first day I see it blooming, and then it just stores it in my photos. But I don't know of a standard practice that we have for phenology charts. I don't know if anyone else has particularly good resources for that as well. I'm gonna watch you to
have
see.
tracked flower blooming for a couple of years on my website. I just post photos every time a major nectar plant is blooming. I did that for 2 or 3 years. So it's but it's not totally organized like in a chart or something, but you get a rough idea. But I could try to develop a chart like that since this question has been coming up.
There's a response saying Mike Connor has a good one.
Okay.
Yeah,
Like
and
a
there,
poster?
Somebody put that in the Q&A. I see. And Mike knows plants and
there are lots of them out there in the world. The Ohio State used to do a citizen science project where they had master gardeners plant the exact same variety of plants and to see where they bloomed. But so there's lots of citizen science, and there's lots of places you can find them out there, but we don't have anything in particular. All right, there's a question. In more northern environments, would you consider recommending to new beekeepers working on hives with no drawn comb to possibly buy a few frames of Better Comb, which is the pre-drawn comb that's from Better Bee, to help a package get a quick start? I don't think anyone on this webinar has experience with it. I'm going to watch.
Right, correct. I have not tried it yet.
However, I've had this question asked to me a lot, and I do think so. On a nuke, it wouldn't be necessary because nukes are going to come in with some drawn comb. But I think if you had a package and you only had foundation, and you were a person that wouldn't ruin the Better Comb before it got to the bee yard, I think it would be useful for your package. We have had a situation when I used to teach at the bee school in Semba where we got really early, and especially if the packages were coming really early and you were in a cold climate, where people got packages, they installed them on foundation, it got very, very cold for a while, and then the bees basically froze in the hive because they couldn't form like a proper cluster on just the foundation. So it could be useful. The queen can start laying right away. It's definitely not necessary in most cases. But it is definitely very, very fragile and it's expensive. But I think if you were just getting packages and getting started out, it could be useful. I think that's the context in which it's the best. All right. So Dan, this looks like it's on starter hives. So wax production with a nuke, and assuming that they're feeding heavily, how quickly could they expect comb production within the first couple of months? They have 8 frame equipment.
It depends, like all things, but I would expect to see pretty quickly after that. I mean, it depends if you install that nuke on April 20th or May 5th. But I tend to think of wax making season starts about the end of April and carries on pretty well through mid-June, and then it's not that they can't draw it past then, but it seems like they want to make wax here in this coming period that we're just entering into. So if you're installing a nuke now, I would expect it to be filling out that 8-frame box in a week or two. Again, given access to feed, you get a top box on it. Another couple of weeks filling out that next box, or at least making good headway on it. Colonies I've seen them draw a box of wax in a few days time when everything lines up, but it's, again, you're starting with a smaller population. I think if you were looking to go from a nuke to 2 8-frame drawn boxes, somewhere in the few weeks to a month kind of thing.
That makes sense. All right, so here's someone calling in that says, did the mild winter cause surviving colonies to come into really strong overcrowding, or come into spring really strong, creating overcrowding pressure? And this person says that they added space. So they added drawn supers 2 weeks ago and rearranged to add open drawn comb above the brood nest. But today their strong colonies are already making swarm cells. What more should I have done to slow down reproductive swarming? So I'll tell you mine, but then I'd like Anna and Dan to talk about what they've seen, because I know they were out doing splits. So in my experience, the thing that causes the swarming and the swarm cells to start is really going to be that nectar flow. And when you're adding the space on top 2 weeks ago, like sometimes that only buys you an extra week. It isn't necessarily sufficient to stop swarming. If you have a really big colony and a strong nectar flow in the reproductive swarm season, it's going to swarm. So that is when you're going to have to make splits. Where I am in particular, where my bees are in Jackson County, they have been bringing in pollen forever, but we've had that like warm, they bring in pollen, cold, then warm, they bring in pollen, cold. So what I found when I was out there today is really big brood nests, but mine were not looking like they were going to swarm because I don't have a lot of nectar coming in my area. So I don't have a lot of like the early blooming stuff. My apple trees are at like pink bud, but they're not bloomed yet. So I was at the point where they were big enough to split, but they didn't look like they needed to split. And for me, I attributed that to that early pollen caused the big brood nest, but the lack of nectar was what was the pressure that didn't make them like feel like they needed to swarm. But I know Anna and Dan, you were out there today too, so you can say or Dan's been splitting for weeks now at MSU.
Yeah, so we have some bee yards in different places, right? So not too far from each other, and it kind of varies based off of yard location. So some of our yards are bringing in lots of nectar, like my jeans right now, which I did not have a chance to change before the webinar, are just sticky from nectar coming out of frames when I was looking at frames. So it kind of varies. Dan, do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, like I said, we have some that are very swarmy right now, and some of that's on us of, other non-bee obligations in life. I didn't get some of that earlier space on them 2 weeks ago. Saying that, they haven't left yet. So we made splits. Some of those we utilize, some of those swarm cells, but it's, we see a lot of dandelions out there, and by late afternoon, early evening, like Anna said, it's falling out of the comb. As far as what you could have done to slow them down more, there's not a lot more. Like Megan said, you're buying yourself a little time, maybe buying yourself a week or something by giving them that space. But when environmental conditions line up, bees are getting the signal. So that's, again, splitting them will, is kind of the preventative, I guess. Giving them space will buy you a little time.
Zachary, did you have anything to add for swarm stuff?
No, I think that's not much you can do if they want to swarm, if they're too crowded. Basically, most people just took that opportunity to make splits, because you can keep destroying their cells, but you're not removing the root cause of the root congestion, good resources come in, and maybe old queen. So if all those conditions are right, they want to swarm. So that you can only, the management only helps to a certain degree, like having newer queens and trying to give them more space. But all those doesn't really eliminate swarming, only delays a little bit.
Mhm.
Just delay basically. So you still eventually need to do something drastic, like making a split. So
And
some people try to break the brood nest by interpacing empty frames. But again, that might be you just gain another 2 weeks maybe. So they're still gonna do it.
And it isn't a failure if they still do it, because if you can push them off, we're in Michigan, if you can push them off a week or two, you profoundly increase your chance of getting good mating flights. So if you're not requeening with mated queens and you're counting on them making their queen cells. So I do add the extra things, the extra boxes on top, and I try to give them another week. But the reason I'm doing that is I'm hoping for better weather for splits. And I'm hoping that if I'm allowing them to raise their own queens, they're going to have better weather for that. So there is a question for me when I was doing the diagram about using the empty box as a funnel. The question says, do you remove the funnel before adding the queen excluder? And yes, so that was not clear because I was trying to do it very high speed. But basically, I just put the box on top so I can shake the bees all down, and then I kind of smoke it and brush them down. The queen tends to run down, so you'll be able to see some workers will like kind of climb up, but I'll just thump the bees off, take that empty box funnel off, put the queen excluder. And there's a question, will all the bees fit into one box? So I'm doing this when it is really nice out. So all the foragers are out in the field, and I'm hopefully done with this process in a matter of minutes, right? So I'm shaking all the bees down. Like some of them do come out the entrance, but that's fine because it's like this huge dramatic thing. And then I restack it, and then the bees all are reorganized within like half an hour. All right. So here's one for Zachary. When you move hives, should you make any attempt, or anyone who wants to do it too, to have the old foragers to be forced to reorient themselves coming out of the hive the next day, especially if they are not moved too far from the old location? So I definitely have seen this where people like recommend putting grass or something in front of the hive. Zachary, what do you think for that?
It depends on how far you're moving. So if you're moving 2 miles away, then that's not an issue. The environment is totally different. Bees, when they just come out from the hive, if they didn't realize the hives are removed, usually they don't. So then they come out and then suddenly notice the whole thing is different, the horizon look different. So the foragers will do what's called turn back and look. So they come out from the entrance and then they fly this way, heading with their head toward the entrance. They say something is wrong. So that's how they learn. Then they start circling around the hive and larger circles, and then they eventually leave. So that's they reorient their hive. So, but if you're moving them only, say 60 yards or 100 yards away, sometimes I don't pay attention when they're leaving, and then they come back trying to find the old hive, and that could cause some issues. So one way is to close the hive for a day also with some people with grasses and then an entrance, so they have to chew their way through, or you can move them a day later. So the confinement would force them to increase the chance of the relearning. Probably it's not 100% effective, but it helps. So any small changes you do near the hive entrance actually could help them to realize there's a relocation. So, for example, painting the entrance a different color or something like that. But try not to move too close, I guess. Another strategy is if you have to move it, And then you just move tiny bit a day, but it will take forever to reach what you want. So if you move only 3 feet away or 5 feet away, and we only have a few hives, and that's doable. And then they'll realize, okay, that hive is moved, and then come back to the new location because once they start finding the absence of the hive in the original location, they'll see a hive next to it that smells the same. They'll go to that hive. So a few feet is okay. But I would say anytime you move 20 feet, it's 60 feet, then they're going to become misoriented and circling around there for a long time, for up to a week. Some years still. They're very stubborn. Unless you have a dummy hive. Some people put a dummy hive there and then dump them to another location. They'll go in at night because there's no place to go. Even though it's an empty box, they'll go inside. And then you just close that hive and probably move to another yard 2 miles away and dump them. So that's how you recover those foraging bees.
All right, so now I'm gonna have Anna talk about a Varroa one. So this person asks, how come even though when bees maintain a stable internal temperature in the brood nest, the external temperature influences the distribution and effectiveness of some treatments placed in the brood nest like Formic Pro?
I don't actually know. And I know we've asked USDA researchers who also said they didn't know. So maybe someone else here knows.
That's mostly because bees only regulate the brood temperature when there's brood. So as soon as you too far away, so you have, even though you have 2 brood boxes, you have the Formic Pro on the top of that second super. And if you measure the temperature there, that one is actually not quite tight, regulated as tight as the center of the brood nest. So there's when we say it's accurate, it's quite precisely regulated to 95 Celsius or 35 Fahrenheit. No, I got it backwards. 95 Fahrenheit
Yeah.
or 35 Celsius. We're talking about the center of the brood nest. So you're talking about periphery, like where you put in a Formic Pro, they are probably 5, I'm talking about Celsius, probably 5 degrees off, because it's away, it's just connecting to the out cover, so there's more fluctuation affected by the outside. So that's, yeah, that question came to me a couple of years ago. So why do we even care if the bees are regulating it? Then I realized the strips are not in the center of the brood nest; it's in the periphery.
And we did a study a few years ago looking at formic polymers. And so we actually studied, and when I say we, this is definitely like the collaborative we. I'm not a chemist. There were other researchers that did this. And they took the formic and looked at how quickly it left the product. So the thing with Mite Away Quick Strips or Formic Pro is that it's formic acid like bound in something. And the rate that it leaves that material, that waxy material that it's bound in, is what allows it to be in the hive very quickly. Like if you just put formic acid in the hive regular, like a flash, it would just be gone that day. And so it's really, really heat sensitive to how quickly it leaves. So there's a big enough dose in there that it's supposed to last for 2 weeks or 10 days, depending on the product. But if it's too hot, it'll leave so quickly that you'll just like get a huge dose of the product, basically. All right, how about some feeding stuff? So this one is directed for you, Dan. If a hive has honey on it already, is it still recommended to feed? Is the nectar flow or food that is present is what stimulates wax production?
So I'm not sure if it's the presence of, or the incoming. My inclination, if you've got a lot of honey, I wouldn't feed in that case. because it's a function of they've got to have the food available. They've also got to have young bees. I forget exactly. I want to say it's somewhere in like the 11 to 15 day, somewhere in that age of a bee is like that's the optimal bee that they're really good at making wax at that age. So, like 2 weeks after a big hatch out, essentially, is when they'll, really be primed to be making wax. But I would, if you've got a lot of honey on, I would not look at feeding, because what you risk doing then is jamming up the drawn comb you have. You risk that, they're not going to make new wax, and now the comb that you do have that was available is now full of syrup. So
Your wax production is more stimulated by the lack of wax, not by food, incoming food. So as long as they have honey food they need a lot of energy. It's calculated about 7 or 8 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax. So it's energetically expensive. And as long as you have food there, they will do it. So it's that detection of just foundation. There's a lack of place for the queen to lay eggs, and then they will do it.
All right, Anna, I'm gonna put you on this spot. So this person says, I did my first split a week ago, but now I have no eggs or queen sighting in either hive. There are capped queen cells in both. Is there any reason I shouldn't just allow them to requeen themselves versus trying to buy mated queens?
Sure. So that's a good question. And if you're seeing capped queen cells, there's a chance that the queen already left with the swarm. So you can just leave those swarm cells there in the colony and let them requeen themselves. One thing you could consider is if you're seeing a lot of queen cells, sometimes the colonies will issue multiple swarms with after swarms. So we sometimes see that where a new queen will emerge and leave with a swarm, and then they'll keep issuing more swarms. So you could be a little bit more careful and just leave a couple of swarm cells, so like 1 or 2 good looking ones, so if to try to prevent the multiple swarm situation. But I think that's a good option for you. There are some risks involved, so if you do let that colony requeen itself with the swarm cell, it's possible that the queen will emerge and won't come back from mating flights, but at that point you can recombine it with another colony. So not really big risks.
All right, so there is a question can you re-explain your modified Demarest split? So I will give it very briefly. Like I said, this is usually something that my favorite way to do this is to do it in person, and we just all go through a yard and do it together, which I did do with a veterinary student today who's on an externship, but we can't do this with everybody, so that's why we're gonna have to do it here. So I'll do it very high speed. If you do an official Demarest, the idea is what you're doing is you're splitting a hive vertically within the same hive. And the split part is that there's empty boxes in between, like empty comb. And so the queen is down below. So you would shake all the bees, put the queen down below, and I usually give her 2 frames of brood, as much drawn comb as she can have, and then a frame of honey on either side. So that's kind of like her brood nest that she's going to be able to continue to lay. And then there's a queen excluder. And then above that, you've got a gap in comb. So this could be like 2 drawn mediums, or you could have a deep and another medium, but you've got a really big gap. And then you put the rest of the brood up top. In a classic, and I do this on a nice day. So I shake all the bees down, I reorganize all the brood on a really nice day, and then I close up the hive. At that moment, that colony will not swarm. And again, it buys me a full extra week before I have to make a decision, because in 7 days, you have to figure out there's going to be emergency queen cells. So the next thing you have to do is go back and clean out those emergency queen cells. But you basically can go through your yard, so let's say if you have 10 hives, you can go through and do all of them this way. The queen is at the bottom, you've got lots of extra space, and all of the brood is at the top. Then you can go home, you can sit down, you can look at your notes, you can have a little beer, and you can make your plan for how you actually want to make your splits. So maybe there's one hive that didn't really have any brood to be split, so you didn't do that. And out of the 10, you've got one that there was 8 frames of brood up atop, so you could make 2 nukes out of it, and so you can kind of sit down and say, I know I'm going to need 7 bottom boards, 7 lids, and you can come back and make your splits. In the actual demo race, so the reason this is a modified one is we're actually taking those boxes with the brood and the bees and setting up new hives with them. With the actual demo array, a lot of times you'd allow it to recombine. I have tried that in Michigan. Where I am, it doesn't work because the colony is still so big. You're going to get what Anna was talking about, where you'll get like a secondary swarm anyway. So that's why I tend to make it that way. It buys me another week. And then I can make my choice, like if I want to order mated queens, if I want to order queen cells, or if I want to let them raise their queen up, you have a little more time. All right. Dan, I'll have you do this one, and then other people can chime in because I feel like we may all have opinions. When you use queen cells instead of mated queens, do you run the risk of losing some of the traits bred into them with having those queens mated with the local drones with more undesirable traits? Thank you.
I mean, I guess open mating, so some people deliberately do that because they feel it's beneficial. They might get cells from somewhere away and they want them to mate with the local drones to get that local bee or half local bee. But yeah, you're right. I mean, if you want something that's kind of been controlled on both sides of the equation, buying a mated queen, you're not going to get that if you buy a queen cell. But again, some people view that as a benefit. You may view that as a downside. Kind of depends what your objectives are.
I know this person has undesirable local drones. I feel like my local drones are kind of desirable in most cases. So,
and you know what? I was just gonna say, if you buy a mated queen, that queen was out open mating in some other area, so it probably doesn't make that big of a difference unless you're really in an area where there's certain genetic traits that are being saturated by drone yards.
All right. So how about Anna, if you want to do this one too, how do you know if the bees need feeding? It seems like there's flowers everywhere now in Michigan.
Yeah, so it's gonna depend on the colony. So part of what we're doing is looking at the forecast, right? If we do have, cold or wet weather coming up, we want to make sure that the bees have food in their hives, and if not, we're feeding them. A lot of it, though, just comes down to the size of the colony right now. So many of our colonies that made it through the winter are really strong in population, have lots of food stores still, and have a huge forager population that's just bringing nectar and pollen in a lot, depending on where you are in Michigan. So if not now, then hopefully soon. Whereas our small colonies, like our nukes and our packages, or some of our splits that are small, may benefit from having feed like syrup to have, extra calories to draw more comb, to build up more quickly. So a lot of it's kind of a size thing. But it's also something that, we're inspecting our colonies. We're looking for stored food in the combs and evaluating them.
All right, this one is calling me out in particular, but I'm gonna also, since Anna and Dan did splits too. It says, Megan, did you do any Varroa treatment in your yard today? What did you use? So so a lot of the hives that I was doing, I was letting them requeen themselves. And for me, that's part of my Varroa management cycle. Or plan. So at this time of year, I'm not doing anything beyond basically brood nest control. Later in the season is when I'll do anything. But for me, splits and then requeening with queen cells is a really big part of my Varroa management strategy.
We're not doing treatments right now as we're splitting. It's kind of a lot of disruption right now to go through colony. We've been finding queens for our splits and getting them settled. So we want to make sure our bees are kind of settled before we do a treatment. We'll be doing a formic acid treatment soon in the colonies that we split, but we want to give them some time to settle after the splits and then kind of build up in numbers to handle the treatment. Anything else there,
And
Dean?
just minor, it's more of primary purpose is to keep the hive clean, but scraping a lot of drone brood off top and bottom bars. Just kind of, again, that's more to smash less bees and things. But in doing that, there's a little eye on there's probably going to be some mites that you're clearing out there too. But that's not that. It's not a formal drone brood removal practice.
All right. Are honey-filled frames from last year good to put into this year's hives? Dan, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as long as that hive didn't die from American foul brood or something like that, and they're not, it wasn't uncapped and fermented and bubbling or something like that. Quite often in that sort of stuff, you'll see, a little bit of mold or something like that. That's generally not too big of a deal. So giving, frames of honey back to a colony in the spring is not a bad way to go. Again, with those caveats in mind.
There is someone that says, have you had any success at placing swarm traps in your apiaries to catch swarms from your hives?
Go ahead.
No, just go ahead, Anna.
Oh, so I will say, every time that I have tried to do it on purpose, it has never worked for me. But I have had several experiences where we have like a bee yard, and then like a stack of equipment in the yard, especially in Minnesota. And we had swarms move into the extra stacks of equipment. So that's my experience. Just when I didn't want it to happen.
That's what you get rewarded for your bad behavior. Like, yeah. So today, my experience with swarming today is that in one yard we had a colony with a swarm with a virgin show up, and but it was definitely not from that yard. So that's the other thing too, is the question said, do you get them from your own hives? But I do good swarm management, so I don't get them from my hives. But you can actually, for some reason, other hives are often attracted to that yard or to your yards too. I've done a little bit of swarm trapping, but honestly, I have, if you do your mite management, you usually end up with more bees. I could take a big healthy hive and split it into 4. And for me, that feels like way less work than driving around and managing a bunch of equipment. My other experience today was we went out and looked at someone who had done it, the situation that exactly what Anna said is they had their old equipment out and a hive had moved in or a swarm had moved in and was looking perfectly great and was already laying eggs in some real garbagey looking equipment, which we decided that the beekeeper was just going to make it an issue for, sounds like next year's problem, basically. So there's another question that says, do you recommend the Demaray method? And what is the weather that you hope for when splitting? And this person is in the Upper Peninsula, which I sadly just left very recently. So I do like the Demaray method, especially for cold climates, because it allows the bees to decide themselves how many bees they need to cover the 2 brood nests. So if you take one hive and you just immediately split it into 2, you're kind of making a choice of how many bees go into this box and how many bees go into this box. But when you do the vertical split and they're split by a queen excluder, the bees can kind of reorganize themselves and you're much less likely to get chilled brood. And like I said, that can get you 1 more week. And everyone in Michigan, but especially in the UP, like, the difference 1 more week can get you into spring before you make the full split. I don't look for weather when I do it. I look for what the bees are telling me. And when I make the splits is really when I've got, like, I know you have to split when you've got backfilling of the brood nest with nectar, and then when you have like full wall-to-wall frames of brood. Today I was making splits before I saw those signs, but I felt really comfortable with it because I had like 6 to 8 frames of brood and I had multiple frames of capped brood on there. So as long as you have like bees that are about to emerge and you're going to get a lot more bees soon is when I would do it. So I would look for when you have lots of capped brood, would be the thing that I would look for. I don't know if Anna or Dan or Zachary, if you want to comment about like what weather you're looking for splitting.
No, we're hoping the bees get split when they need to split. Maybe a bump in a day or two to not do it in the snow, but yeah.
And I'm
Yes.
splitting. Oh, go ahead, Zachary.
This depends if you're using, if you're buying cells or buying mated queens, then it's not an issue. But if you are doing cells or let them raise their own queens, then you probably shouldn't be doing it 3 weeks ago in Michigan. Right now, it seems to be the weather is stable during the day, 65, 70s, which will be good enough for the queens to fly and mate.
That's kind of
Yeah,
mean to say to
occasionally.
someone in the UP though, who I know it was
Okay, yeah.
it was a high of
Yeah, I
50
don't
up
know.
there.
I don't know the answer because I never lived in UP. They're probably like a month behind us, right? At least.
It's at least it's not so bad, but
Okay.
yeah.
So if they're a month behind, I would say you have to wait for 2 weeks, 2 more weeks to make spreads.
Yeah, and so here's another caller from the UP. This is making me so happy. I have colonies that overwintered in the UP this year. They're big and healthy. I let them keep everything last year. Is it still too early to think about honey production when all I have is the brood chambers that they overwintered in with drawn comb? Is there enough time and is it safe for them to fill undrawn supers with a harvest? This is I like how this person is already at the eyes on the prize of the honey supers. So this is absolutely the time to put, like, you can make your splits, put the supers on, and then so depending where you are and what you have in particular. So for example, I do know some beekeepers in the UP that have basswood near them. I also know some people who have tons of fireweed. Like those are blooming at 2 different times. So, when you're going to get the comb drawn and when you're going to get it filled. But yes, we have the whole season ahead of us. All right. So I feel like these are the questions we're getting a lot, so I feel like it's fine that we just keep answering them because in my opinion, when they're worded differently or for people in different environments, it's still useful. So, Anna, do you want to start with this one? It says, I'm in the north around Traverse City seeing drones and drone cells. Should I wait until I have warmer nights to start queen rearing?
So why don't you do that one, Megan? Because I think you put a lot
I
of
thought I
thought
was
into
going to
early
say
queen
splits
rearing.
at the end, and I felt like I was getting greedy. So I usually start queen rearing where I am in Jackson County around the first week of May. I usually try to have the queen cells for my splits. I do want to say the only reason I split this year is because I'm taking veterinary students down to Texas for work. So life is getting in the way of bees, which is the wrong order. But so normally I would be waiting another week and starting my queen rearing. Oftentimes, even if you see drones, the thing that's the most important is the weather forecast beyond the point that you can see it. So oftentimes I start queen rearing and my first batch sometimes is amazing because the weather turns perfect. Usually we get like a warm up. I start queen rearing. I feel awesome. And then in Jackson County, our last frost free date is usually May 10th. And then the weather turns to garbage. My queens emerge and like 50% get mated. And then the second round that I do is fantastic and everything is go for the summer. So you can try it really early once you start seeing drones. The worst case scenario is that those queens don't get mated or you get really poor return. And then by the time you do the next one, it's usually fine. All right. Okay, here's one for you, Anna. I keep getting a lot of burr comb built onto new foundation. Should I keep scraping out the burr comb?
Yeah, so burr comb just kind of normally means comb in a spot where we don't want it. And it's pretty normal for bees to put comb in different spots where we're not expecting it. We can try to prevent some of this by keeping new frames of foundation really tight together. If you try to space out the foundation, then you're giving them extra space and they will likely dry out that burr comb. But otherwise, if it's just like extra comb on the bottom or the top of the frame, a lot of it's a beekeeper preference and how much it gets in your way. So for some situations, it's perfectly fine to leave it. As Dan was mentioning, you know, sometimes we're removing the burr comb on the bottoms of the frame, especially if it's like catching or rubbing the other frames when you're pulling it up. But a lot of times it's perfectly fine to leave, or it's perfectly fine to scrape up off as long as you're careful and not squishing the queen when you're removing it.
There's another question on the comb front. Dan, if you want to take this one, is it better to coat your new foundation, presumably plastic foundation, with beeswax, or leave it uncoated and let the bees do it themselves?
No, generally, yeah, coating that foundation, they're gonna take to it much quicker than just bare plastic. They generally don't like to work that very well, in my experience.
But
I was gonna say this might be the most important one. Sorry.
Go ahead.
So if you do leave the comb or the wax completely uncoated and you don't buy it coated, because most of the time it comes coated, they will just ignore it and they will make really, really huge messes off of it. So if you've bought it waxed, that's ideal. If you bought unwaxed, you absolutely have to wax it. Otherwise, you're going to get a huge mess that you'll regret.
I was just gonna say, you know,
I don't know, the cell uncoated plastic foundation? Is there such a thing? I thought they're all pre-coated.
You can buy uncoated for like people that don't want other people's wax on it.
Okay.
If it's up to me, I would buy, I mean, I use the old crosswired stuff, but if it was up to me, I would buy extra double super coated.
And I was just gonna say, normally, if you buy it coated, it works fine. I know some beekeepers want to put extra wax on it, but you can, if it comes coated, that works perfectly fine.
Yeah. All right, there's one from our dear friends Lori and Kevin, and it says, are you making splits and doing swarm prevention earlier than usual this year? And you finding that your bees are ahead of schedule compared to normal years? So I'll do mine and then maybe Anna and Dan can do theirs, or Zachary too. So it was early. We got pollen early. I feel like I have more brood than I normally do right now because they were able to start. But when I was out there today, where I am in Jackson County, they were not fixing to swarm yet, which puts them, so every single year right around tax day in Michigan, since every single year I've been here, we get a warm up. And that's when I go out and put my boxes on top. And everybody wants to do splits then, and that's too early. And then usually it gets cold after that warm up. And then we get another one right around the 1st of May. And that's usually when I do it, because that's when the nectar starts coming in. So I feel like we've been cold the last couple, like this week and last week. It's really, really cooled down. And so it's really slowed everything down. So we're and just with the fruit and vegetable growers that we work with, we're kind of getting back to normal again. Just with this cool. So we're kind of back to where we are. So I'm doing it a little earlier for scheduling reasons, but it doesn't feel like we're significantly earlier.
Should be at least 1 week early, maybe.
Mine didn't seem to be like that. I'm not sure, because it has been pretty cold. I'm not sure about degree days where we are, but it could be about a week early. But it's not, you know, back in February when it felt like we've had the warmest winter ever, it doesn't feel as dramatic as it felt earlier.
A month ago, I felt like we were 2 weeks early in like mid-late March. Like late March bees look like early April bees. Now I feel like we're like a week ahead, maybe. But yeah, like you say, the things started early, they were accelerated, and then they've slowed down. But at a certain point, once the bees get going and building numbers, they're on that trajectory.
Yeah, all my bees died, so I don't know. But I don't know. I know the fish in Ohio about 1 week early or two, about 2 weeks early.
But that is a good point. Like when fish are going, when trees are blooming, like those are the things that are responsive to degree days. And
Yeah.
so like watching these external cues are really useful. All right, so there's a couple ones in the chat, and it says, how do we know when to unwrap hives in the spring? The hives are in beautiful Leelanau County. Anna, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So, one thing that we'll say is we, in most parts of Michigan, don't find it necessary to do any wrapping of hives. We don't wrap our hives on campus just because we found that we get bees surviving winter just fine and it's extra work to wrap them. But the idea behind wrapping the hives is to, keep the brood nest a little bit warmer in the spring. So it's kind of handy when we're having that spring weather and especially that cooler periods after the bees have started rearing brood. It maybe helps them keep that brood nest a little bit warmer. At least I don't know exactly what the temps are like in Leelanau County, but here in Ingham County, we've had some nice warmer days. I guess it was like snowing over the weekend, but we would say I guess
I scraped frost off my car this morning too.
It was warm today. So I'd say, before you're splitting your colonies, you're taking off those wraps. What you don't want to do is leave them on when it actually does get pretty warm outside because you don't want the hive to overheat.
And the thing about the wraps is like, I have definitely wrapped hives. I've definitely not wrapped hives. It's one of those things that maybe you use a little less food or maybe you get a little further ahead, but it's not a survival issue. So you're not going to have a colony just like up and die because you unwrapped a week too early. So it's a decision I would not heavily overthink. There's kind of benefits of taking it off and because you get the sun warmth and benefits of leaving it on for the insulation, but it's insulation and hive wrapping and things like that are not something that's going to like make or break your colony as much as mite treatment, feeding, and swarm control will. There's another question in here about what are your thoughts about reversing versus not reversing brood boxes in the spring? Does either method have a major advantage or disadvantage? So I believe Anna talked about this last month at our webinar. I don't know if you want to talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. So the main disadvantage to doing a reversal. So the idea behind a reversal is to put empty drawn comb above the brood nest. And so sometimes you can do that by reversing the brood boxes. If you have a smaller colony that's only taking up that only has brood in the top box, then you can reverse the boxes. So the bottom box that doesn't have any brood on it can go above it. But in a lot of our colonies, we do see brood in both boxes. If you're in like a 3 deep system, then maybe you'd have brood in just 2 of the top boxes and can remove that bottom box with no brood and put it on top. But a lot of times what we're trying to, because in many of our cases, we have brood in multiple boxes, we don't want to split up that brood nest because then it's hard for the bees to keep the brood warm when the overnight temperatures are cold. So a lot of times we're just adding honey supers or other boxes of drawn comb on top of the hive and not actually reversing those brood boxes because we don't want to break up the brood nest.
And this year when I went out, so I usually do reversals like during that tax day warm up that we have. And I think I reversed some of them. Like, so most of them, they were too big and they were covering both boxes of the brood nest. So it didn't make sense. But the ones that were small, it kind of made sense. So it's not really like a major advantage or disadvantage across the board. It's like, is this particular colony set up that a reversal will be useful for that particular colony? So here's a good one that I'm really curious for the follow-up of what's the situation that necessitates it. And the person says, how to successfully move a frame of brood from one yard to another without bees. So ideally, you're not moving brood from one yard to another because for biosecurity. I don't know, Dan, do you want to weigh in on this?
Like a warm day. It's not something I really do. And I guess if I was going to, I'd take the bees with it. Like you mentioned earlier, talking like you give it a light shake, you get those young fuzzy bees that are going to be accepted into whatever you're putting it in, not cause conflict. Presumably they need a frame of eggs or something, or just wanting to boost the hive in a different location. So yeah, you want to keep it warm, because if it gets chilled, then your colony gave it up, and your receiving colony is not going to get the benefit out of it if it gets chilled. So I don't know, keep it warm somehow. Bees are the easiest way to do that.
And so like, yeah, for sure, like cat brood can't get chilled, and then open brood can't dry out. So you'd put like a wet paper towel, but also like one of the things is we do a really good job on telling you how to keep your healthy bees alive and well and healthy, or I think we do, but like that's what we aim to do. You can do all sorts of weird stuff, but there's not necessarily going to be a should. Like there's not, if you're going to do something wacky, like moving one single frame without any bees on it, give it a try and see what happens, basically. All right. So I left this question for last because it was my favorite one. I'm gonna put Anna on the spot, and then other people can go to this. Have any of you seen bees that are truly mite resistant yet? And I like that they answered with the term, or ended with the word yet.
So no, we have not seen any bees that are truly mite resistant yet. We know there's lots of really good breeding programs that are trying to help select bees that are more resistant to Varroa mites, but in general, because mites can move from one hive to another, they can be on adult bees, and they can move from colony to colony. Mites can reinfest these colonies that do maintain low Varroa mite load. So, and especially here in Michigan, we just have so many bees here. We're a really good state for pollination and honey production. So we have a lot of beekeepers and honeybee colonies in our state. So that makes it pretty hard to just rely on genetics by themselves, because we have such a risk for horizontal transmission. But if one of you guys have seen them, let me know.
If I see them, everybody in the world would know, and everybody would buy them, and the problem would solved. And we probably could go down to like quarterly webinars where we just drink mead and talk about honey production and what's in bloom. Like it would be fantastic, but no, we're not at that place. But I like how it is yet. Like hopefully we will get to that breeding programs, and exactly what Anna said is we have to have the good bees, but we have to also like reduce that disease pressure, so that if those good bees are there, we can actually see them and they're not just getting dumped on by all the horizontal transmission. Well, Zachary or Dan, do you want to add to our hopeful Varroa mite resist, and also those triple Alops resistant bees we got to get going on too? All right, so that was the end of the questions. Those were really good questions. Thanks everyone for sticking through to the end. That was really good questions, and it's a very exciting time of year for doing bee stuff in Michigan.
All right, we'll see you at the next webinar. Thanks everyone. Have a great night.